the first tag automation meetup. The topic for today is test automation design principles. So we wanted to start this with a difference because in the past we have been having a speaker who's been speaking all along, and then in the end we had Q&As and stuff like that. So this time we thought let's give it a different try where everybody is going to be a speaker. So this is going to be a very interesting way of conducting meetup. Face to face, it would have been much easier, but then let's try this way, and let's see how it goes. So few things to start with, especially the housekeeping stuff. Yeah. So just give me a second. Yeah. So this is a forum to speak out. So this meetup is very special. Whoever has joined in, please do keep your point, ask questions. If there are any comments, please do make them. We'll try to make use of the chat window that is there right on our screens. And if possible, if somebody is talking, if somebody is giving a heads up, please ask any questions then and there. Myself, and then I have Senthil along with me, who will be probably helping me with a few of the coordination stuff. And if there are any comments, please put them through. We'll try to go through them all one by one. And interruptions are allowed as long as they are planned and organized. I'm sure, like as in past, most, like everybody in our, I won't say most, but everybody in our meetup are very decent guys. No unnecessary interruptions. So if you would like to interrupt, if you want to cut a particular talk and then add something to it, please feel free to do that, but then in an organized way. And then we'll keep everything, questions and answers and any comments or any points that you're trying to make time bound so that everybody gets a chance. And then thankfully there's a raise hand option. This was not there earlier in Google Meet. Now it is there. So if you have any questions or doubts or comments to make, please do raise hand. We're more than happy to. Okay, John, you've already done that. So yeah, please do feel free to raise your hand or put a message in the chat window. We can definitely have a look at. Okay, so John, you have raised your hand. So is there anything you would like to talk about?
No, I was just practicing. Then I'll think of something to talk about in a second.
Okay, you're being a good tester there. Okay, nice. So, all right. I'll be recording this meeting, in which case I'll make it available, but not very soon. So please don't drop off thinking that there'll be a recording, and then we can have a look at later on, because that will defeat the purpose of having this online catch-ups. So, all right, all good. And for expectation settings, when I myself looked at this topic, and then there were quite a few things that crossed my mind. I was like, this can be very elaborate topic. So what should be the best approach? Again, like I'll leave it to you how you want to drive it. This is going to be an experience sharing meetup. So please do share your experiences. Please share your knowledge, your skills on certain topic. So to start with, I've just created a small framework in a sense that for this particular discussion to happen. But then how much time do we spend on each of the topic is up to individual. Like if say there are more people talking about, the development, then yeah, it may take slightly more time. And then likewise, we'll try to, consolidate within that particular time span. Yeah. So moving on to our first slide of the day. Okay. Please excuse me for a minute because bit of a sore throat. My throat is not in the best conditions. Anyways. All right. So to start with, we'll pick up the test automation lifecycle that we all are familiar with, hopefully. And this is the underlying flow that I'll be following. That we usually start with the decision to automate. Right, just give me a second.
While Vikas is offline, can I ask on the floor, how many of them are not familiar, like newbie, or like in automation space? Is anyone in this group today? Okay. I'll take a silence as everyone is into automation already. Yeah. Thank you.
I wouldn't say I'm a newbie, but it's been quite a few years since I've actually practiced it in earnest, having been at a few different companies, and that first circle, the
Yep.
decision to automate test, is always the point that breaks down. And I guess the other question is, it depends on what level we're talking about automation here as well. Like if we're talking about unit testing or component testing, or that deciding the test tool, etc., is kind of where we start falling down and it gets swept under the rug.
Yep. Thanks, Rob, sharing your. I would say I will fall under the same category. It's good to meet people here. Vikas, sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
No, all good. Thanks, Senthil, for filling me up there. Sorry, I underestimated my bad throat. There's something, I think the children are bringing that from school for whatever reason. Okay, all good. So this is a test automation lifecycle that we are following in any organization. I'm sure like this is true for every organizations out there. If somebody was to differ from this approach, please do raise your hand and then say, no, your organization has a different approach altogether. Yep. Now, okay. So these are a list of things that we can possibly think about, especially how the whole process of automation takes place, and then, how it initiates, and then how it develops, and then how it executes, and then probably handover and things like that, or evolution to the next level. So this is a small infographic that I've created to highlight a point that we are going to touch upon various aspects of test automation. Somebody before this meeting started, there was a point that was brought in that we'll be discussing only development aspects. No, it's not going to be that, because development is a part of a very big process. And so it starts with the initial phase, like when things are not yet decided, and then we drill down to the next phase, and then eventually how it all turns out to be. So we'll start one by one, and then if anybody, not anybody, I'm sure like everybody has something to talk about from your organization point of view or your skills perspective, please do feel free to interrupt and then make your comment or ask a question. Okay, so we'll pick up the initial. Yeah.
You're leaving a question to the floor or later? Just to...
No, it's a question to the floor, definitely. If anybody wants to bring up something. We'll pick the topic to start with as initial phase. So would anybody like to talk about how they are handling the requirement, the business value, the assessment, the feasibility of automation, the budget, team, resources, infrastructure, what tool or framework are you going to use, how you're handling the security, authentication, and authorization, and other related stuff. So this is an open question to everyone. So feel free to, this is an open discussion. This is not that myself or one person is going to talk.
Can we treat like, we are sharing our experience?
Yeah.
It could be earlier in our automation career or even now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to.
I'll take the leap and go first. I think the big thing for me is the identification of risks. So when we're talking about the requirements, I guess all of the business value is everything becomes a costs versus benefits discussion.
Yep.
And if you can easily identify a high level of risk that can be easily automated, it makes that conversation a hell of a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Is who's going to do it? Because I have been a test automator in the past, but then if I go on leave or if I change teams or if I leave the company, then the automation tends to crumble to dust and people start ignoring it. So I think it's important to ask the question around team, and I'm assuming that's kind of in terms of ownership. Who owns the automation is one of the big questions to answer first as well.
Wow, I couldn't have agreed more on this one. That's such a wonderful point that you're making there, because ownership is something which is very sometimes test automation happens to be nobody's child. It's just there, like automation testers are there, like maybe they are testing COEs who are promoting it, but then the delivery team doesn't really want to own up to it because they think manual testing is much cheaper and then automation testing is time consuming. So does anybody out there has a good team structure which which has a proper roadmap with regards to automation? Anyone?
I think in my team recently we have started automation with the front end application, which is based on JavaScript and React. So obviously in most of the teams we have a smaller testing team and the dev team is quite bigger. And coming to the fact, the coding part of the automation is something where the testers usually lack compared to devs. And obviously because that's their day-to-day job, devs are far more better in when you say the quality of the code, writing the quality of the code than compared to a tester. So what approach we have followed is, developers are helping the testing team to set up the framework, so where we can bring our experience in terms of the quality, in terms of what kind of test has to be written. And at the same time, like we can learn from developers on better coding skills, like, where we can improve. So it's a two-way thing, I would say. It's not just an individual's responsibility or not just the testing team responsibility to own it. But at the same time, it depends who is having more bandwidth to pick it up, like where we can create some tests, and if developers are having some bandwidth, they can write the code and we can do some pair testing, like, pair up and help each other. So that's the kind of approach we are following right now, and I think that works well for us.
Wow, that's a very good takeaway there, Namita. That if the devs can help the automation testers to write better code, because I've seen because again it's their expertise. The devs slightly have an edge
Yeah.
with the latest, coding standards and
Yeah.
other stuff
Yep.
that's related to development. So yeah, that's definitely one very good key takeaway that we can have.
And also the other thing is if you're merging, code with your pipeline and you're having one single pipeline where the until the test pass, the devs are like, if the pipeline is failed, devs are not able to merge their things. So it becomes a blocker. And if you have a smaller testing team, it becomes even a more bottleneck for everyone, like, where they're not able to push their code. So that to remove that bottleneck, I think it's important that everyone can put their effort to get that bottleneck removed.
Mhm.
So if everyone has that understanding of how the framework is set up or how the test is set up, probably you don't have to be just dependent on one person to remove that bottleneck or to fix that framework or to fix that test. Rather than anyone who has the capacity can pick it up and fix it, so the team can keep going rather than just waiting on one person. So I think having it as a part of CI/CD also gives an advantage that to remove that bottleneck on one person.
Yeah,
This
definitely
is
makes
a
sense.
question to Namita. So I can see the collaboration works well in your case between dev
Right.
and thing, which is really nice. But the ownership still stays with the test team and purely for the maintenance part, or even to take it to the next maturity level. Is that correct?
In few companies, like I have worked in Suncorp before, and what I have seen, it was not the testers, it was the devs who were owning the test. And it was a part of their actual card to write up the test. So when they pick up a card, they pair up with the testers, and testers will write them, the test in the form of VDD, Cucumber, whatever the framework they follow. So they will pass the acceptance criteria or the test which has to be covered as a part of, like, probably the acceptance criteria test, I would say. And developers will ensure that when they say the ticket is ready, those tests are also ready. And testers will do a check to ensure they are happy with the results and they're happy with the test. But devs are only going to cover the acceptance test. The extra test which you want to cover as a part of your regression suite or your automation suite, probably testers can add those more things in the ticket. So that was a kind of shift left mentality I have seen in Suncorp, and I think that was good.
Nice. And
Thank you.
I was going to ask as well, on top of that, as soon as you start talking about anything to do with the build pipeline or the path to production, it's not just a tester thing. And depending on the company you're in, it could involve different people. There's security, there's the engineering leads, there's the development team, there's all these different gateways. So I was wondering how, who drove the initiative? Was it a tester-led initiative? Hey, we want to do this. We want to implement this automation in here for these reasons, and kind of to these things around requirement, business value. Like, how hard did you have to push for it?
It's hard, I would say. It depends when you talk about CI/CD. Of course, it depends on the type of issue, what's happening. So if it's the pipeline thing that's owned by the DevOps team, like, who helps you setting up the CI/CD, and if there are any security issues and all that, issues, they help you to fix it. What I was talking about is mainly from the test perspective and from the I was talking about from the end-to-end test perspective, which is kind of, comes under the testing bucket somehow. But yeah, it depends. Like, of course, when you talk about unit testing or integration testing, it's more about the dev's responsibility. But anything which is related to just about the pipeline or the security things, that goes to DevOps again. So it's a combined effort. I would say people pick up their part and they start working on it. But who owns it? Who owns it is a good question initially. What I have seen in the current organization is they build a team, like who all are going to work as a part of that pitch or project, and they work together to, and they pick up their things in which they are going to work, and they collaborate with each other. And so in that way, you're not just putting responsibility on one person to fix it, but yeah, at the same time, people are working on their part, and they keep on pushing their changes to bring it together, is what I have seen. So it's not just one person, it's a group who's working together. So when it comes to something not working, you're not just pointing on one person. It's like together they are hurdling and seeing like where it's wrong, and who is the best person who can solve that issue.
Cool. Thanks, Namita. So anybody else has to add anything to what Namita said?
Yeah, I pretty much.
Yeah.
Sorry, I pretty much agree with Namita. Like my previous company, we took this kind of approach where devs, DevOps, and testers all took their part, and DevOps really helped to integrate the CI/CD. And after integration, if any test fails, of course, it creates a notification and goes to the testers, and then they check why it is breaking or what maintenance is required. And based on that, pretty much we took decision. But top of that, I just want to add the main challenges I have faced before or have been facing now sometimes when it comes to the team and resources. Sometimes when you start automation and you or anyone else who are enthusiastic, sometimes they can discuss about automation and maybe it might be agreed by the business, but again, it might not have enough resources. And then I faced this kind of questions that why existing testers cannot work in something, and then why are you taking this approach? So yeah, always we don't have enough skills on the floor or enough resources to start automation, and there are some testers who have been working for long, and there are some rigidity sometimes to move on to something new. So there are pushbacks from the colleagues or sometimes from the team. But yeah, that is a challenge I faced a lot. But yeah, again, as Namita said, it's like collaboration. So when you have a good team, you can overcome those.
Yeah, these are very good points, Ishanu. And as you are speaking, like I'm looking at these of the bullet points here, how each one of them are being covered. Like first of all, like resourcing, right? Like if a particular user is say automation tester is good with only a particular tool, then they tend to promote that particular tool. And then based on that, if it's say a commercial one, then it can either the budget can be imposed on the automation, or the automation testers or the test manager or lead, they can send back, okay, this is the effort estimated, this is the budget that will be estimated for this whole automating the whole regression or sanity suite. And likewise, so it's somewhere related, resources, then what's the team structure, what's the composition, and then feasibility I'll not touch upon, in a sense that we are assuming here that it is feasible, but then we have to pick up the right candidates for automation, the ones which will give good return on investment. And then, as Rob also pointed out, we'll have to think about, how much is the cost and the benefits. So basically the business value. And yeah, kind of we're covering most of it. And then security, as Namita pointed out, the DevOps are better people who can, pinpoint what should be our approach. So anybody else? Yeah, Rob?
So just another thing to build on top of that, as I mentioned before, one thing that I don't know whether we're covered in this bullet list or even part of this forum, but the question around what level we're testing at. So if we're looking at risk points, could that be covered by a contract test or a packed test? Could it be covered by snapshot testing at a lower level? So the team I'm currently in is doing a lot with React, and there's the UI tool Storybook, which is kind of completely dumb, for lack of a better word, but you can test a lot of the UI changes at that level before it gets into before you're going up that testing pyramid. because as we all know, the higher up the testing pyramid you get, the more flaky it gets and the harder it becomes. So I'm just wondering, is there a question here around challenging what level we're testing at?
Yeah, that's a very good point there. Yep. We'll have to think about the level of testing and even maybe types of testing, right? Like whether performance testing will be part of automated testing, because in a way it is. But then sometimes there are dedicated performance testing teams. So they have their own list of tools which they bank upon. So level of testing, yes, definitely yes. And then even types of testing, sanity and regression could be one type, one set of testing. But then, yeah, they can be other, say, deployment testing, just to be sure that a deployment has gone through well. Sometimes we focus automated testing as functional testing. It's more to do with the functionality of the application. But then there are other things which, yeah, definitely we need to consider. Yep.
And I completely agree. And like the other one that's coming up recently for me is accessibility testing. So it's got nothing to do with functional.
Right.
It could work so well, but if that's only one aspect of quality as a whole.
Yes. Cool. So I mean, these are a few takeaways that I would expect, like, all of us to take from today's session. That what is that we need to consider at initial phase. I'm sure, like, this is a very, very big topic, and then thanks to all the inputs that we got on this particular phase. So let's move on to the next one, which is another important phase. So yeah. So moving on to the design and development. So this is where assuming that initial phase has gone through, we have got all the approvals and things like that through whatever, a political or non-political reason, budgetary reasons, we've gotta go ahead with this. And then eventually we land upon the design and the development side of things. Okay, so this is where the whole magic happens for automation. But then again, it's part of a bigger whole, so it's not dissociated with the rest of the phases. So let's narrow down to the design and development phase. So these are the key bullet points that we can think upon and discuss upon. So anyone has anything to add to this? Like, maybe we can give some chance to somebody who has not spoken at the moment before. Anyone? Yeah, John, please go ahead.
Yeah, just picking on design patterns in terms of like the design of the actual automation. I would say one of the most important things that I've come across over the years is the separation of interaction with the application from assertions. Basically separating the world out from the logic of what you're testing. So that's pretty much the most important principle, I would say, as far as the design of the low-level design of the system. And the other stuff just falls out from that, like the separating into modules and so on, just falls out from that one principle of separating the interaction with the application from all the other logic in automation.
Anyone to add to what John said?
So could you elaborate, John? I think I understand. I'd like to make sure that I understand what you're talking about.
Yep. Okay. Sort of like a lot of unit tests, or a lot of say high-level, say Selenium tests, they're sort of based on unit tests that I've seen. So, and some of them are testing relatively complex logic as well. So So you'll see a test that'll go through a whole lot of steps, and then will do an assertion on, is the button green, and then explode if it isn't, and throw an error. And the more complex tests become, and it's harder and harder to sort of work out what's gone on and why something's failing, which is not a problem with unit tests, because unit tests are only, by definition, are only testing something very isolated. So what I would prefer in that case is for the framework that I'm using to actually separate the fact that that button is green into a static, struct or an object, and pass that out of the interaction, and then validate that object separately from the interaction. Does that sort of make sense? It's probably easier to describe with something like, say, a tax application. Let's say it's a service level application, and you're getting some JSON back, and you're saying that this person's insurance should be some amount, or their tax should be a particular amount. So you could churn through the JSON or the web page using whatever methods that you're using with your language, and then throw an exception when you find something that you don't expect. But I find it's a lot better to actually separate that out, create an object that is your tax return or your insurance claim, and spit out of your interaction that object, and then validate that object. So if your test fails inside the interaction, then that's a completely different type of test. That's may not even be that's not even a business error. It could be your server's down, your 404ing, all the technical stuff will explode inside the interaction. But if you've got, say, bounds testings and business rules, that'll fail in the second phase when you're actually asserting against your static struct. And you can can develop your assertions separate from the application under test as well. So if you've got relatively complex logic that you're testing, then you can do that without the application. And all the application does is, all the interaction does is provide you that object.
Yeah, John. So if I got the point right, so you're saying, like, as automated solution increases, the complexity increases, what happens is it becomes very hard to pinpoint where things have gone wrong. And yes, I mean, I absolutely agree to that. And if the automation framework is not designed well, then it can be an absolute nightmare, because I've experienced this when I was handed over automation framework which was very complexly designed, and then I was asked to maintain it, and it was such a nightmare to find out whether something happened wrong in the backend, front end, or middleware, or was it something wrong in the automation test itself, or was it something wrong in the test environment. So I absolutely agree to that. So that's where the architecture and design patterns come into picture. I'm glad that you made that wonderful point. You gave such wonderful examples. So it narrows down to what is our architecture for the whole test automation solution. So we have to think a bit long term here. Because I've seen many people, okay, a particular functionality has come, they create automation solution, and then the next project comes, they are asked to either reuse it, or they try to create few more set of tests, and then they try to collaborate with this particular code base. And then in the end, it becomes a hodgepodge thing. So there is no vision there. So I personally think there should be a long-term vision before creating something. And then it's a good approach to have a distinction between a generic plus specific approach. So there has to be certain libraries that are created for generic, click of a button, connect to a particular API and all those things, which are generic. And then there's another level of detailed tests which use these generic tests to do certain specific actions. So in that way, we are narrowing down how exactly the execution is happening, so that if there's any failure at a particular point, it can be identified easily. So
Yeah.
that yeah.
And I think another point on that is, I don't know if it's in there, but it's kind of related to the test data generation, but or maybe the modularization. Say that quickly 5 times. Like what are you automating against? Like with those third-party calls, in my head, every time I think third-party calls or APIs or whatever, my personal preference is don't automate that, because that's creating it's kind of an external dependency. So you want to kind of keep all of your tests atomic and under your control. You want to, as much as possible, be able to inject the data that you're going to be testing against. You want to be able to mock out any of those external calls at all, so you can actually mock both a positive and negative result. But admittedly, that's not always going to be possible.
Yeah, Rob. Yeah, always there are certain things which are beyond human control. But then, yes, as you also said it, if we have reasonable, maybe, I mean, one topic that we can talk in detail could be design patterns. So there are various design patterns that we can stick to. They can be structural, how to assemble the objects and classes into the larger structures while keeping these structures flexible and efficient. And that's a very generic way of doing it. We can have certain creational patterns wherein we can provide certain object creation mechanism, so that it can increase the flexibility, usability of the code, try to reuse the stuff. And then there can be certain behavioral patterns, in a sense that if there's any particular interaction between one object and another object, so we can try to put them together. So these are various ways in which we can possibly think of writing a code, create our design patterns. And I think like each one of these has its own added advantage, but then maybe it can be a mix of all, right? Stick to good coding standards, write the right level of abstraction, and things like that, and then have a separate module to generate test data, or even to maintain the test data, which is slightly separated from the code itself, so that it becomes maintainable code, right? And yes, of course, we can have exception handling, error handling mechanism, which it need not be just try catch block. We can have certain specific what do you say, specifications. What are the expected errors at this point of time? If they are expected, are we saying pass, fail? Yep. Yeah, John. Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, and the other main one, I think, is to not be afraid to destroy what you've done to refactor continuously. I think the worst mistake you can make is to just assume that you've got it right the first time. And I think that's the biggest mistake that I've seen, that we're placing too much value on what you've done and not continuously refactoring.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that. And I'm speaking for myself, the number of times I've kind of pushed forward with something that in hindsight was quite obviously wrong. Yeah, that's a big lesson to learn.
Yeah, cool. Santhil, you also had to say something.
Yeah, was a good point John made. Wanted to share, like someone with the less experience, making initiative in a company with a like a proof of concept, and you go with a lot of into and you build a framework which may not have a longer vision. Yes, you demonstrate some business value to the to the team, and then you take it to the next level. But you should be able to keep that aside, see which works better for a longer run, and you should be able to get into that path rather than building on the weak base set on top of it. Continue to do that. That's what I want to add to that. Good point, John.
Yeah, Rob.
And I think it's important, following on from that lesson, you kind of need to learn that lesson completely. What I mean is that when you decide, you need to make a hard decision of, okay, we're not going to use this, completely clean up after yourself.
Right.
Otherwise, it becomes unmaintainable. People get confused. Are we using this or are you using this? I don't know. You really need to push the big red button and nuke the whole thing out of it to get rid of it, depending on the situation, obviously.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, hybrid, like historic systems where you can look back over the years of the company and see bits of everything that everyone's tried for the last decade are pretty common. They're pretty horrible.
So anybody else wants to talk about any design patterns or any, design or development phase related stuff? Yeah, Shanu, please go ahead.
Yeah, as John was highlighting the point where we also have certain endpoints, sometimes a lot, and then the button is not green. So we may not able to differentiate whether it is because of the endpoint is not returning the correct data or it is actually on the UI level. To handle that, what we did in my previous project, we completely created two separate projects. One is for the APIs and one for UI. And both of them were completely different and independent. But when we ran the UI test, only thing we checked whether endpoints are responding or not, whether or not it is just throwing 500, which is internal server error. If not, then we consider that as a UI test failure, although there might be some data validation error from the API itself, but that should be detected in the API tests. And we had these matching test cases where we could tally, for example, 10 UI tests are related to 5 more API tests, and then we see that there are matching failures. Then we could easily point out whether it is actually API error or the UI error.
Yeah, Rob, go ahead, please.
I'm finally learning to follow the rules and put my hand up. What you say is 100% correct, and it kind of, this is a complete tangent, and I'll say it and then we can move on, but it kind of talks to what I call the quality pyramid. You've got the automation or the testing pyramid, but then you've got the monitoring and alerting phase over it. So if you don't have both of those clearly in mind, or if you don't have clear visibility of both, there's almost, and even as I say this, I don't quite agree with myself, but there's almost no point automating it if you don't have correct, accurate monitoring alerting, and vice versa. If you've got the best monitoring alerting, you might not need to automate, progressively test everything up front. If you've got an awesome amount of alerting and monitoring, you know exactly when there's a problem and exactly where it is, and then you can fix it, then we can move on. Yeah, to your point about the multiple kind of APIs, you need to know exactly where, and to John's point as well, you need to be able to break it down to exactly where the failure is.
Cool. So would a good design cover that up? Like if we have a good design in place, will all these false positives and then even pinpointing the exact reason for error can be pointed out? Would that be?
Personal view, it's kind of a mixture of all of them. It's architecture, design patterns, dependencies, obviously. Modularization is the big part.
Yeah.
Test data management. How many times have things failed when you're testing against dynamic data? You've got modularization in there twice. Is that because it's really important?
Yes, I would like to think so. Maybe again, like it's more of a duplication, but then I had put it in bold initially because I personally value it much, and considering like I've seen few of the bad examples out there who have I would say they write classes, objects, and all those things, but then they don't really know what's the purpose they are serving. So we need to keep it really modular in a very meaningful way. Like what is one unit of code, like what does it do, what its purpose in the real life. It should be so self-explanatory that if it's to do with API, it is to do with the API. So it has to take a package from A to B, it has to take from A to B, and something happens in between. It says, hey, this is what has gone wrong, and it comes back with a proper error message. So it should be each module should have a purpose, and it should be each building block should have its own purpose. And then when that part becomes part of a bigger module, a brick becomes a wall, then it still does the same thing, but then the wall has a different purpose altogether. So it has another set of inputs, another set of outputs, and then it has a different take. So that's why I would like to highlight modularization in a sense that it forms a central part of the whole design and development phase.
Yeah, I think that kind of talks to John's point before around, and I was going to share a story before, but it's kind of the exact opposite from a manual testing point of view. So, when I first started out writing manual tests, it was click this button, that happens, verify that is that, verify that, and kind of evolving that manual testing stuff into go to this page, verify all these things, go to this page, verify. And I think it's a mistake, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the point you're making is from an automation point of view, flip that mentality on its head. Because it's automated and it's running quickly and it's running all the time, you want to modularize it to be testing one thing at a time. So if a test fails, you know exactly what's failing.
Yep, definitely. Any what happened to Namita? Namita is keeping quiet. I'm not sure if she.
Oh, I'm there. John has raised his hand, so I was just waiting for
Okay.
him to.
For some reason, I didn't see his hand.
I just raised my hand to confirm what Rob said. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So Namita, you have anything to add, or even Devangini, Hani, Madhuri, you three are keeping quiet, and Vijay, maybe you can add something to this, any of this. Even if you don't want to, just feel free to say no, like you're more in a listening mode.
Yeah, hi, this is Vijay. I was doing automation about 5 years until 5 years in the more manual testing these days, but getting back to automation now. So what I know, the best practices we used to do was a bit old school, I suppose. Now I'm in the mode of getting back to automation, but as far as I remember, and just started working on a new project now. still doing with Selenium and stuff. I'm not sure of the latest tools and technologies as well, but uh, I think even the main problem that I'm facing right now while doing while coding the tests are, the application is still not stable and there's a lot of performance issues. So each time I run, it fails in different points. Um, Sometimes the page load takes different times every time. Um, so the whatever, I mean, having um, uh, weights and things like that, it's still not helping much. But if I run the same test in the evening, it works really well because nobody will be working on the product the application at that moment.
Yeah, good point, Vijay. Sorry to interrupt there. So, but
Yeah.
your exact point takes us to the next slide, which is the execution and maintenance. Okay. Now, I'm glad that you made a point where the application itself is not stable. Okay, so there are unexpected issues and errors that are popping up. Now, that is where this execution and maintenance becomes very critical. I personally didn't put that point here. Thanks for bringing that up, because the whole thing, like no matter how good your automation framework is, it eventually narrows down to how smoothly does it execute, right? And then if there are certain changes that are being made to the application, how frequently do we have to make those changes to our automation code to be reflected? So whatever we are discussing till now was like automation this, automation that. It was a bit automation specific, but then we forgot to discuss about the stability of the application itself, right? So though I have not put that point here, sorry for that, I'll make a point here to be noted. But then to add to Vijay's point, so and even what John was also saying was, I think you were trying to bring up a point where it's a genuine failure, not a bug or anything. It's nothing to do with instability. Maybe our API goes down. It happens in real world. And then if my automation framework is not able to identify what has caused that problem, then it's a problem. But in this case, what Vijay is pointing out is it's a very fundamental question, that if application is not stable, no matter how good framework we write, it will definitely expose the shortcomings of the framework. That's how I'll put it. But then, do you think we should? This will push us back to the initial phase where we'll have to get back to the decision to automate thing. Do you think? Anyone? Any comments? I'm just trying to articulate what Vijay said. Yeah. Yeah, John, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's also sort of the automation's part of a software development process, which is part of a company. And sort of as high, when you're automating at that level, you're kind of consuming everything underneath. So, you can build a resilient framework, but if best practice or some better practice isn't being exercised by the developers, if you've got a sort of dictatorial sort of finance-driven management and developers under stress and everyone leaving, it's going to be really hard to get your automation under control, just based on what you're consuming, sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I guess it's not only the automation. I guess it's also what's happening underneath. Yeah.
Yeah, Rob, please go ahead. Thanks, John.
Yeah, 100% agree. And to your point, Vikas, as well, it does also kind of go all the way around that circle into the first phase of deciding whether to automate something or not is, an analysis of we know the system is flaky, so do we bother automating it? The answer is probably no.
Yeah.
If the answer is we don't know or we think it is, and then you make it all the way through to phase 3, and it turns out that it's just completely flaky, then you do need to turn around. And again, to John's point, the automation is not our baby. Let's throw it out. Let's think of different solutions to the problem. And the other thing to add, as I wrote a comment, is that sometimes it's not the application under test, or even the system infrastructure, but sometimes it's also the tooling and the framework. And when I say that, just recently I was doing like a proof of concept thing using Selenoid, which is like running on Selenium Grid, and taking snapshot testing with different viewports. And you'd run the same test multiple times, and sometimes the scroll bars would show up and sometimes they wouldn't. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time investigating it. I just thought, what the is this? And kind of threw it out. But the same needs to be said for the infrastructure of the test framework as well.
Right.
Namita, good having you here.
Yeah. Thanks, Namita. I would have loved to hear more from you.
Oh, definitely, probably next time. But yeah,
Yeah.
I was counted till 6, so yeah, probably.
Yes, I mean, I hope you are not offended when I my only objective was to at least Rob was open in saying that in a very casual way, but then the objective was like to pull everyone in. If you have more experiences to share, more than welcome.
When you get to know me, I was just joking.
I know.
It was nice, especially this time of night.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Probably we can connect again in the next meetup soon.
So, any final words to add? Any?
From me?
Yep.
Probably I'll get some more experience in the meantime. When we connect for the next meetup, so I will have some more to say.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Namita. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. So we'll just try to connect to. Okay, there was one more. Honey, you have anything to add? Honey is in listening mode, I believe. Okay, no worries. Okay, all good. So again, looking from a positive point of view, right? We should have a good, robust logging mechanism, wherein what exactly the automation step is being executed, what is happening, what data is being passed, which system is it interacting with. Everything needs to be logged, maybe locally or remotely or on some, Splunk or whatever. So that will definitely help identify a few of the issues with regards to, if there are any false positives and things like that. So it'll kind of create a bit of a transparency. That's how I see it. Put a containerization there because from execution point of view, yeah, Rob, I mean test logging. But then if there's anything that's coming from application under test, we need to log in, right? Like if I'm making an API call, okay, from a functional point of view, it needs I need the right endpoint to connect to. And maybe I don't care what is the status. Say it's a post. Maybe I don't care what the status is or what the response is. Maybe I just care for the status. But if there is a logging mechanism where I put in all the necessary details, like, okay, it gave me success, which is test pass, good. but then it gave me this particular response. So which I'm storing it in my log, so that for future use I can pinpoint, oh, it's not the test that is failing, it's the application itself which is sending me a wrong say response or something of that sort. Yeah. And then containerization, in a sense that we use Docker, try to keep your automation code portable, or try to move it across, put it in cloud, and maybe on different machines with different operating systems. So there are certain sync issues which Vijay correctly pointed out, and a few of others as well, wherein there can be certain page is not loading properly, and rest of the tests are failing. Even though you put enough wait times, it still doesn't work. Yes, those are mainly to do with how exactly we handle those special cases. Yeah, Rob, please go ahead.
So I just had a thought on that, and I'm sorry to take us off on another tangent. I believe we're over time, but it's like, if automation, when we're talking about pages not loading and things, the question that always comes into my mind is that, is this just an issue with the test framework, or is there the risk that real people out in the world are having the same page not loading as well?
I think like the way I personally see is, it's a tester needs to behave like end user, right? And then whatever problem he or she is facing is definitely something that end user will face at some point of time, right? Yeah, Ishanu, please.
Yeah. So on this special case, what Rob was highlighting, probably we should not start our test unless the page is loaded. So there are certain checkpoints we probably can introduce. For example, whether JavaScript have been loaded properly, and then we start our test execution. In that case, we can rectify whether it is the problem with the actual application or with our test framework.
Not quite, but I see John's raised his hand, so he can go first.
Yeah, John, please.
I just want to make the point. It's also possible to make your automation too robust, to sort of Rob's point, and forget how robust you made it. So all your functional tests are passing, but you've forgotten that you were waiting for up to 6 minutes for a page to load for your tests to pass, sort of thing. But yeah.
That's kind of my point. Is like, especially if you have SLAs to meet, if the page hasn't loaded within 5 seconds, pulling a number out of thin air, then technically it's a performance related issue. But just in the terms of, like, especially if you're running tests in parallel, or you're running a lot of tests, or you're running them so frequently, if one of them times out, like, is it actually an issue, or is it just a bug in the system, like the test system, or is it actually, if 1 out of 100 page loads time out, does that actually mean that 1 in 100 page loads in production are timing out as well?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, the solution to that question would be, I would say, like, again, a holistic approach to the quality itself. Like in the past, I had this opportunity where I was owning the entire testing thing, and then I could do whatever I could, and then that's where, even though the functional automation was working great, everything is working perfectly fine, but then if it narrowed down to the performance, like a few pages were loading slower, but then again, so once you take care of the functional aspects, yes, we jump on to the next, maybe not next level, but then parallelly, whenever the time permits, keep that on your cards. Like we have to do performance checks, which is again a very critical thing. So do the performance check, page load times, and then not only that, if the load on the server increases, is there another server instance that has been created at the right time? So we were able to, I was able to sit with the DevOps guys and say, you know, it takes say a few minutes to spin up another instance, okay? And then SLA was say 80% load. If a server is 80% loaded, then spin up another instance. So we were able to mimic that scenario. But we saw the moment if I'm doing my performance testing, say if it has hit 80% and then in another few seconds or minutes it hits 100%, then it is going to take 2 minutes from there to spin up another instance. So what we did was, you know, let's cut it down to 60%. So the moment it hits 60%, the server load, spin up another instance and wait for it. And then if it doesn't go up, then end that particular new instance that has been created. But if not, then, you know, that's an approach that we took. Does that make sense, Rob, John?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's like I'm just having flashbacks to a previous life before Zero, around having arguments around AWS auto scaling group rules, and it's like the default rule is, as you say, like 80% or 70%, and it's like if you've got a DDoS happening, you don't have time to respond to that. So it's all about monitoring kind of standard production load, and the standard production load never gets above 10%. You set that boundary at 15%, and then you start. It also kind of, I guess, depends on how paranoid you want to be or how robust you want to be, and what type of system you're working with. If you're dealing with tax, or if you're dealing with kind of concert ticket systems or whatever, then as soon as it hits 10 or 15%, you add 10 instances to it. Like you go overboard just to cater for it, and then you slowly ramp down.
Right. I'm glad that you had similar experience.
100%.
Yes, really nice. So any other topic that anyone wants to talk about on these lines? Unless otherwise we'll move on to the next one, which is the final. So I mean, we are talking about the scalability here, so I'm glad that we have kind of covered most of the topics here. Integration with other apps, you know, with Jira, where the ticket automatically gets updated, and then cool. So let's move on to the next one, which is the documentation. I will not take too much time here. I think we started technically around 6:15ish, so we're slightly 3 minutes over. So coming back to the final stage, which is the documentation. So, or handover for that matter. Like I've not seen many companies here who have a handover mechanism. If they're automation testers, they do it, and then one fine day they leave, and then that automation is just there, unless somebody wants to pick it up, which is not always the case. They want to create something new. So there needs to be a mechanism to document all of this, hand it over. Like, need not be when the resource is leaving, but then it can be also, okay, this was a automation project that we had taken over. And these are the matrices that we have at the moment. And these are the test results. This is the coverage. This is the amount of usage. These are the users. And then any review comments. And then what is the final outcome of this whole project? So it helps onboarding new members too. Definitely, yes. That's a very important point there. Yeah, Rob, please go ahead.
Can I also add, I guess it's kind of included in metrics, but when we talk about automation, if automation never catches any issues,
Mhm.
From a business point of view, they kind of think, what the hell did we spend all this money on if it's not catching any issues? Like, the sales pitches, kind of, it's kind of like an insurance policy. What if something happens?
Mm.
But then if it doesn't catch any valid issues up front, or if it doesn't catch enough valid issues to cover the cost,
Mhm.
then that is often what kind of kills the concept of automation in a lot of people's heads.
Yes, Antil, please go ahead.
I think people, like, for the maintenance point of view, just add in point to Rob, correct me if I'm wrong. When we are maintaining our code base in automation, whatever the manual, I'm assuming in most of the case, there'll be some parallel ad hoc manual testing is happening. If any issues are raised from the business level or in other team member, will be refactoring our automation suite and part of the maintenance to include those valid scenarios to be included. If that's the case, we don't need to, worry much. Is that?
No, not exactly. It's more a case of it's more a case of, more often than not, automation is something that you build a suite and no one really wants to take ownership of it. And yes, it should be updated as you're saying, to add those valid cases. But if it takes, and I'm no good at head maths or finances at all really, but if, let's say, it takes 2 months to build up an automation suite using 3 people, that's like, forget about the cost of the tools or anything. That's resources. And when I say resources, I mean people, and I'm not shying away from that, because from a money point, you're paying these people's wages to write a set of automation, an automation suite. But then if it doesn't catch any issues, it's just sitting there running in the background, then it's like, let's say, again, someone can do someone can do better maths than I, but let's say it's $1 million for that 2 months of work. Well, then again, cost versus benefits. If it's only going to catch one issue a year, that's not worth $1 million.
Yeah, but there's 2 parts I can, again, it's not just about catching issue only. If I were to, when I'm going to present an automation thing, I'm going to eliminate some of my repeated regression aspect as a manual thing, right? We are equating that effort into an automation. So if that's the case, like, I need to be someone in place in my team to do that manual effort, and that's going to incur cost as well. So the original, the vision is to eliminate that aspect and bring an automation. So if it's working well in that sense, it's okay. But with identifying an issue, it's based on like how progressively you maintain that suite. Again, you said,
Yeah.
if it's left behind,
Yeah.
then it's a big challenge. And that's my just thinking it loud. Yeah.
No,
That's a very important. Sorry, Rob.
You go.
I'm just reiterating, Senthil. That's a wonderful point that you made there. How progressively you're maintaining it.
I was
So
going to say the same thing. Yep.
yeah,
If you're not maintaining it, if no one owns it, if it's not part of business as usual, then there's kind of no point of doing it.
yeah, those are very golden words, by the way. Like in the world of maintenance, yeah, it has to be, the word progressively is so important, because even like there are teams where there is the automation. There's one guy who's been executing it for quite some time, but there's no addition to it because for whatever reason. But then yeah, it adds value only if there is a progress happening, there's an addition happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
John raised a hand.
Yeah, John, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a point that Rob made about the just tracking defects raised by automation. In the framework that we're running with at the moment, we actually have a function that will lower an exception from an error to a warning. Okay, so if you get an exception in your test, you can put a predicate on that exception, and if it matches the predicate, you could say, this is a warning, this is a known error, and you log that with the Jira ID. So your log lists all the defects that the automation is crossing. So, and it also doesn't have any, doesn't show any errors of known errors. They're all warnings. So you get a listing of all the active defects, and then when the defect's fixed, it'll actually log a different type of error, saying you need to verify that this has been fixed and take away this.
That's a really good point.
Error block. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. So you kind of you're not having any kind of, what do you call it, false positives. Oh, the error's gone. Yay.
Yep.
Yeah, Rob, just to add to that and to John's point, like in one of the framework that I had created, so I'd gone to such an extent that it would update the results in Jira ticket, and it will also change the status of the Jira ticket. Okay, say if it was in test, it'll be moved to not done. So I used to have two intermediate status for Jira. One was parked. Okay, if there's an error, it will not move it back to the developer. I could have done that, but then I felt I need to validate that. So there's an additional status that I had called parked. So if the execution fails, the ticket will be moved to parked. Okay, and then all I have to do is just go and check which one are in the parked, and then it'll have all the screenshots, all the log messages and whatnot, and then pinpointing to the necessary repos, and then I can just see it. Okay, this seems to be a valid bug, then I'll move it back to the dev. If not, I say, okay, this is not a valid bug. Maybe it's a one-off thing, in which case I run it again, update the results, and then set it to done. Or it could be something to do with the automation code. Something has gone wrong. I need to update that and then execute again. So that's something what I recollected.
Yeah, good one.
Cool. So we need to have certain, what do we call the contingencies in certain ways that automation can raise false positives or false negatives. So yeah, cater for those situations. So have something intermediate so that
yeah. And I guess that all goes back to almost the first and second phases.
Yeah.
Modularization, like the more modular it gets, the less of that should happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, good stuff.
Cool. So that brings us to some key takeaways. I'll just reiterate what I felt was key takeaways. Good that, Rob, you pointed out on identifying the risks in the initial phases. So that's very important. Cost versus the benefits, and who owns the whole automation suite. And we also spoke about, the bottlenecks that could be created, who should own the security and things like that. What are the level of testings that we can have? And then coming back to the next point, design and development. John made a very good point that if the level of complexity grows within a framework, it becomes very hard to detect where things have gone wrong. Yep. So there's one more point that was made saying we can have different set of tests
few for UI, few for API, so that we can find out where the failures are happening. Good monitoring, good alerting system, something Rob has been pinpointing, which is very key to the whole thing. And of course, good design, long-term vision, which comes with experience, not just for the sake of it. But how long would be based on the duration of usage. So we need not create something for next 10 years. It could be something for next few projects or something of those sort. From execution and maintenance phase, I think the good takeaway was one point that was brought in was if the environment or the AUT is unstable, should we really go for automation or should we go for some different solution? And what if automation framework itself is not stable? Again, it brought us back to good monitoring mechanism. And then if there are any scaling issues, response times, and then are we following any Orfix AUT app? And then any SLAs to match up to? Maybe that can be catered by a separate performance testing team, or it can be part of the automation testing team itself. And then lastly, we spoke about the value of documentation. Most of the points were covered. But then Senthil pointed that it is helpful for onboarding as well. And then we also discussed what if no bug is detected? Is it really worth spending money on automated testing? And we also spoke about how exactly we can cater for those false positives and false negatives. And lastly, how progressively we can maintain this automation code. So these are a few key takeaways. So if anybody has anything to add, final words before we wrap up. Yeah, John, I think you have raised your hand. So.
Oh, that was by accident, but yeah, thanks Vickers for bringing us together though. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks. Rob, anything else from you, Ishanu, Senthil?
Yeah, you summarized well, man. All good.
Yeah, I'll reiterate what John said. It's been a really good chat. The only other thing that I'd add on somewhere, maybe under execution, is even as I wrote that comment or fixed AUT when you were talking about things being flaky, is to the question of what we're testing against, we need to make sure it's as production-like as possible.
Right, yep.
If not against production itself, again, not possible in some situations, but if you don't have a reliable environment, there's no way, I wouldn't even approve any automation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been a good chat.
Yes, definitely, yeah. So anything from Senthil, Ishanu?
All good, man.
So all good. Yes.
All good.
It's nice to catch up after a long time in the meetup, and it's a great discussion for me. There is a lot to take. Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. It really was a very good discussion. I personally enjoyed it. Very productive. I'm sure, like in most of the organization, these kind of discussions should happen. Like at least we have Stag, wherein people from the various teams can come together, share their views, and then I'm sure like we all had something new to learn today. At least consolidate whatever we know. So yeah, thanks for your time. Thank you. I'm sure we'll have more meetups in coming days, and yes.
Let's have more interesting like this in coming month, man.
Sure,
Yeah.
definitely.
If opportunity comes, we'll meet in person.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Definitely.